Chapter 96. The training ground remained silent as Raon collapsed with his teeth broken and the beautiful flame filling the space was extinguished. Wah! Raon! Runoon! Young Master! He won! Young Master Raon won! The first ones to break the silence were Sylvia and the annex building's maids. Since they were the most distressed about the situation, they looked like they would break into tears and run into the training ground. Raon! Raon! Kya! Without minding the glares of the members of the direct line and collaterals, they screamed and shouted in joy. Their clear voice was a shout of freedom, breaking from the oppression they'd been receiving so far. Runoon! Woov! The shouts that followed came out from different locations in the training ground. They were the voices of the trainees that had been with Raon for over 3 years. Sir Raon! Raon! Roar! Direct line, collateral, vassal family, and even the recommended children from outside shouted out Raon's name in unison. Humph! That's the least he should do. He is the top trainee, after all. Baen leaned back in his chair and nodded. I knew from the beginning that he was going to win. But didn't you shout too much to be saying that? Baen's butler tilted his head while keeping a smile on his face. Raon, I'm not going to forgive you if you lose here. I'm the only one you are going to lose against. That's what you said in the beginning. That's. Fight, break it. Take that bastard down a peg. That's what you said earlier, and when the young Master Raon collapsed, you shouted with a wah. Stop it. Baen wrinkled his red face. I don't remember it. It seemed he was too excited since he couldn't remember that at all. However, he didn't think he was wrong. Since Raon became the 5th training ground's top trainee instead of him, it was only natural for him to beat up a sorry excuse of a member of the direct line like him. I am not the only one who did that. Every trainee is shouting Raon's name right now. So you couldn't control your emotion and shouted like that. You're still a baby. Martha, who was sitting in front of him, glanced back and sneered. You are really pathetic. You should bring a pacey around from now on, and don't tell anyone you know me. Martha Zighart. Lady Martha. Baen's butler pointed at the handrail in front of Martha. The handrail should have been a cylindrical shape, yet it was distorted with a clearly visible mark, one left behind by a fist. Didn't you clasp that with your hand? It looks like Lady Martha was quite excited as well. And no, I wasn't. What kind of bullshit is that? Martha violently shook her head, swearing with a clearly flustered expression. Why would I get excited from watching such a low-level sword duel? Are you taking me for a snotty kid or something? She denied it wholeheartedly. Martha, it's pointless to pretend you weren't. I also heard you shouting foul language. You are the one who was pretending. Fight me if you don't like it. Raon. Baen and Martha, who were growling at each other, turned their heads at once upon hearing a thin voice coming from the bottom. Raon. With her hands around her mouth, Runan Sullian kept calling Raon's name. Raon. There was no way he could hear her even with her hands there, yet Runan kept shouting Raon's name. After seeing Runan, who was definitely and honestly cheering for Raon, Martha and Baen lowered their hands. TSK. There was no point in watching this sword duel. It was such a low-level fight. Martha awkwardly scratched her head and stood up. Hey, dead fish eyes. She put her feet on the chairs in front of her, where the swordsmen from before were sitting. Didn't I tell you? That the results would be interesting. That. The swordsmen ducked their heads, unable to respond. If your skills are bad, you should at least be tactful. But since you have dead fish eyes, you'd better train a lot in order to survive in the future. After laughing at the swordsman, she left the training ground. What a temper. Baen shook his head and stood up. Martha only acted docile in front of Raon, and she had become more violent than before towards the others. He turned his head to look at Raon standing at the center of the training ground. The way he was confidently standing as he looked around the training ground reminded him of how he stopped the blood-raving demon on his own. I'll never be able to forget that. I'm going to repay that debt throughout the rest of my life. However, I'll never give up. Bayan clenched his fist and stared at Raon's back. I'll definitely catch up to you. Glenn heaved himself up from the chair's backrest. His pupils were bigger than usual, and his eyebrows were lowered. It was an extreme reaction when one considers how rarely he changed his expression. My lord. Ren looked back at Glenn with a trembling chin. The thing the young master used in the beginning, in the middle of the river footwork, wasn't that the Supreme Harmony steps? It was. Gasp. Ren had always kept a smile on his face, yet his collected expression was broken. He exclaimed at the ridiculousness of what Raon had done. Glenn furrowed his brows. What surprised him the most that day wasn't the fact that Raon had defeated Raden with an overwhelming difference. It was the fact that he had used the Supreme Harmony steps that he was only taught 2 weeks prior. The Supreme Harmony steps was a footwork that Glenn had created once he had reached transcendence after breaking through the demonic wall. It was an advanced martial art that an average martial artist wouldn't even be able to learn, even if they tried for their entire lifetime. However, Raon managed to acquire it in only 2 weeks. That was amazing enough for Glenn to be awestruck and surprised, despite how he didn't show much emotion. I thought it would take him at least half a year. Glenn gasped, looking at Raon standing there confidently. He had expected him to use it in half a year at the earliest. 2 weeks, huh? It was his first time making a mistake after he reached transcendence. It was absurd, but it was making him smile. And the swordsmanship. Raon used the true meaning of the star-connecting sword at the end. A 15-year-old boy, one who wasn't even qualified as a swordsman yet, had used the true meaning of the swordsmanship. It was impossible for him to not be surprised. He is really amazing. The Supreme Harmony steps, the star-connecting sword, and the flame at the end. Ren was too astonished to finish his sentence. It's not that amazing. The Supreme Harmony steps is only at 1 star, and the beginning of the first star at that. He also still has a way to go with the star-connecting sword. If Raden had used another flexible sword technique, he wouldn't have lost so easily. Glenn hid his surprised expression and shook his head with his usual appearance. What do you mean it's not that amazing? My lord's face is... Ren smiled wryly with his eyes and hid his mouth. I'm telling you it's not. Glenn turned his head while caressing his cheeks. It seems Ren's personality was taking after Rimmer after hanging around with him so much recently. The sword duel ends with Raon Zighart's victory. The ringmaster, who had been standing dumbfounded, remembered his role and declared Raon's victory. People started to shout from everywhere. Woa! Raon! Raon! Runoon! The young voices were from the children. Those children. The trainees that had been with Raon were all shouting in unison regardless of their position: direct line, collateral, vassal family, and recommended children from the outside. It's my first time witnessing such a thing. No, I think it's the first time ever that everyone is cheering for a collateral. Glenn slowly nodded. Indeed. There were occasions of a collateral getting achievements or winning a duel, but it was the first time one was getting cheered for by direct line, collateral, vassal family, and recommended children at the same time. It was a day with lots of mysterious occurrences. I wish the others can become one like them. Glenn didn't respond. Since he used to rule over the place as a dictator when he was infected with demonic energy, such a thing was impossible for him. He segregated them by might and blood for a long time, and he was too old to change that now. However, he could see the light. If it was Raon, he thought he would one day change the house. After all, he knew about the unfair treatment collaterals received despite being born as a member of the direct line. My lord, the sword duel has ended. The ringmaster knelt under the platform and bowed. Everyone in the training ground looked at Glenn. Glenn stood. It was time to celebrate the victor, although he needed to take care of the cheater that interfered with the noble fight first. Glenn's threatening gaze was directed at Balder, sitting at the west. Raon walked up to the platform along with the ringmaster, who was supporting the unconscious Raon. He looked scary. Glenn was even more expressionless than usual. It seemed he was displeased with the current situation, as a frightening atmosphere was surrounding him. Is it because of my victory, or? He was already aware of the fact that Glenn disliked him. However, he would never fail to reward a merit or let a fault go unpunished. Even if he was displeased with his victory, he shouldn't have been petty enough to plainly act frightening. Rumble. Glenn stood up on the platform, and the training ground's atmosphere grew extremely dry. It felt like he was in a library, as not a single sound could be heard. Raon Zieghart has won today's sword duel. Whoa! The trainees shouted even louder as Glenn declared it, although most of the direct lines and collaterals remained silent while watching them. I'm going to reveal the condition Raon Zieghart had in this sword duel. The condition set by each swordsman during a sword duel was revealed after the match. People grew silent, looking forward to hearing the condition. Raon Zieghart wanted Raon to kneel down and apologize to Sylvia and the Annex Building's mates for the problems he has caused in the Annex Building. He also wanted the true Martial Palace to never interfere with the Annex Building. People remained speechless as they stared at Raon. Was that the condition? An apology? An apology to the maids. The usual condition of a sword duel was everything the opponent possessed. Since it was a battle of pride, it would usually be the opponent's wealth, their best weapon, or breaking their arms or energy center. However, Raon only wanted an apology, and not one directed at him on top of it. He just wanted an apology to his mother and worthless maids. People were shocked, as it was their first time hearing such a condition. They could only stare at Raon dumbfounded. Apology in a sword duel? He is a fool. I know, right? He is just like Sylvia. Direct lines and powerful collaterals laughed at him. The vassal families didn't say anything. Raon Zieghart, Powerless collaterals that were ousted from the center, and the swordsman from the outside that had been weak from the beginning, engraved Raon's name deep into their minds. Since the sword duel is over, that condition shall be fulfilled. Coup. Glenn flicked his finger and Raon, who was lying flat on the ground, coughed up blood and opened his eyes. Where am I? Arg. Why am I here? Since his teeth were broken, Raon was helplessly lisping. Sylvia and the maids from the Annex Buildings shall step forward. Sylvia, Helen, and the maids stood up straight upon hearing Glenn's order. They were just standing there, trying to read the atmosphere. Come down to the training ground. Yes. Sylvia nodded. She led the maids to the training ground. How did this happen? My lady, I'm too nervous to walk. Since they weren't used to being the center of attention, they were nervous as they hesitantly walked up to the platform. Raon turned around to meet Sylvia, Helen, and the maids' eyes. He told them with his eyes that everything was okay, so they could proudly walk up. Everyone calm down. We didn't do anything wrong. Yes, my lady. It seemed his gaze had an effect, since Sylvia and the maids started walking more naturally. They stood next to Raon and bowed at Glenn. We have arrived. Glenn nodded and looked down on Raon, who was still out of his mind. Raon Zieghart. Yes. The sword duel has ended with your loss. Raon, who finally realized his defeat, trembled. Raon Zieghart, respect the condition of the sword duel. Kneel down and apologize to Sylvia and the maids. Grandfather. Raon violently shook his head and knelt towards Glenn instead of Sylvia. I am a member of the direct line with a swordsman's qualification. How can you ask me to kneel down to maids that aren't even collaterals? You are the one who made that promise. Since you lose the sword duel, you have to keep your promise. Grandfather, we are at an official event. Call me your lord. Am my lord. Please forgive me. I can win next TI. You shouldn't be begging forgiveness to me, but to them. Keep your word as a member of Zieghart's direct line, Raon Zieghart. Glenn frowned. The coarse atmosphere became even more dreary. Goosebumps appeared on his forearm, as if a storm were about to break. Ugh! Raden's whole body trembled, weighed down by his pressure. He looked at his father, Balder, but he also shook his head. Damn it! Damn it! He swore on the inside. It was all Raon's fault. That son of a bitch had messed everything up. I'm going to kill you, no matter what. Even if I have to give up everything, ugh. His hair stood on end upon seeing Raon as he was standing up. His heart was pounding too heavily, to the point that he couldn't meet his eyes. His entire body hurt from getting beaten up by him. His lungs were shrinking so much that he couldn't breathe, and he was too scared to look into his eyes. Fear? Am I really afraid of a guy like him? That was the only possibility. Arg! He raised his head because he couldn't admit that fact, but his stomach became upset and he wanted to throw up as soon as he met Raon's eyes. It was a natural outcome since the martial arts he had learned throughout his entire life was defeated, and he was beaten up countless times even after losing in terms of power. Go and kneel down before them. Ugh! Because of the gaze closer and more frightening than Glenn, Raden walked up to Sylvia without saying anything back. I'm going to kill you all no matter what. Even though he couldn't look straight at Raon's eyes, he bit his lip with the determination of killing them. I am sorry. I apologize. He lowered his head enough to hide the fact that he was gritting his teeth. Sylvia didn't say anything, and the maids awkwardly bowed back. You don't need to lower your heads. Raon surrounded the maids with the aura from the 10,000 flames cultivation. The color returned to the maids' pale faces. Raon. Sir Raon. We are getting an apology today. Raon calmed Sylvia and the maids, then walked up to Raden. Do it over, Raden Zighart. What? The condition was to kneel down and apologize. Kneel down and lower your head. Are you seriously not in your right mind? After this, do it again. Raon's voice became deeper, and Raden started trembling. The fear of Raon was carved into his body. Ugh! Raden looked around, but nobody could help him. It felt like Glenn's frightening gaze was urging him to continue. Raden bit his lip with his few remaining teeth and knelt. I am sorry. Tell them what you did wrong. I'm sure I taught you what it was. He was right. He told him what the problem was each time he beat him up with his fist and sword. Since it hurt too much, he remembered every single one. I sent a fake letter, trampled on flowers, spat on her hand, struck the maid's cheek, kicked her with my foot. I one-sidedly picked a fight with the annex building. I am sore, Because his pride was hurt while being suppressed by fear in his injured state, he fainted once again. It's all right. Raon smiled at the maids, whose faces were blue with worry. I'll make sure nobody can mess with the annex building, so don't worry. Sniff. Sniff. The maids finally burst into tears. Raon. Sylvia bit her lip and grabbed Raon's hand tightly. My lord, there's still more to the condition. I want you to confirm it personally. Of course. But before that, Glenn's frightening gaze was directed at Balder. I need to take care of the person who interfered with the noble sword duel. Chapter 97. Balder Zighart. Balder bit his lip and stood up. He looked irritated, but he didn't seem flustered. So, he was aware of it. Raon nodded, looking at the grunting Balder. Since he had noticed what Balder had done, there was no way Glenn wouldn't have realized it. Answer, Balder Zighart. Yes. A sword duel is Zighart's tradition and honor, passed down for 1,000 years. Are you looking down on me so much that you thought you were allowed to dirty it with your petty trick? Glenn's voice had become softer, but his pressure soared like an explosion. Rumble. It felt like there was an earthquake as the entire training ground trembled, and the atmosphere weighed heavily on his shoulders. Balder faltered, unable to withstand Glenn's tremendous pressure. He barely managed to regain his balance, but he couldn't hide his trembling shoulders. I beg your pardon. Balder tightly bit his lips and bowed to Glenn. However, as a father I was just cheering for my son. I told him nothing that could change the outcome. Balder Sighart. Glenn's eyes were a burning crimson, much like an erupting volcano. Do you have a death wish? A frightening murderous intent spread out in an instant. Huff. Raon's back curled in. Even though the murderous intent wasn't directed at him, he had goosebumps and the strength left his body. You told Raon to fight with power. You told him to break through with sheer strength, giving up on variety and sharpness. Do you really believe that I would have missed such a sloppy aura message? Ugh. Balder's body bent gradually. It wasn't his own doing, but Glenn's shapeless pressure that was forcing him that way. Raon swallowed. Glenn's pressure was thrilling enough, but there was something more surprising. Did he just say he read the aura message? An aura message was a special technique that transmitted words using the aura from the energy center or heart. That meant that its ability to ensure secrecy was top-notch, yet Glenn was saying that he had read the message. That's crazy. He didn't infer from the situation, but actually read the aura message. That meant that space itself was in his hand. Ha! That was so ridiculous that he gasped despite the seriousness of the situation. You must have thought you could cover it up after the sword duel even if you were found out. Since you are my son, the true Martial Palace's master, and the division leader of the Flexible Sword Division, you must have believed that I would just let it pass. Ugh. Balder trembled even more as Glenn continued speaking. The trembling of his hand made it look like he was suffering from hand tremors. But you crossed the line this time. You dirted the duel and lied to me. I beg your pardon. Father, I order you, as Sieghart's head of house. Glenn raised his chin, looking down on Balder, who was curled up like a worm. Slam. Every swordsman of Sieghart knelt at once, and the entire training ground trembled. I sentence Balder Sieghart to 1 year's probation, during which he can't leave the True Martial Palace. The True Martial Palace and the Flexible Sword Division's budget will be confiscated for 1 year, and their activities will also be halted for a year. By your order. Every swordsman shouted the same phrase and bowed. It was such a magnificent sight, enough to make people tremble. Father. 1 year is too much. And having the True Martial Palace and the Flexible Sword Division punished along with me is too harsh. Harsh? Crimson lightning jolted from Glenn's eyes. You disgraced my name and belittled Sieghart's history. 1 year of probation is as light as a feather compared to what you have done. I'm the True Martial Palace's master. I'm in charge of so many missions and work. Without me. How laughable. Do you think you are the only one? There's no problem with leaving your work to the other palaces. Father? Color left Balder's face, as if he suddenly bled out dry. Then shall I break your energy center instead of the probation, as that was your son's condition for the sword duel? That's. I'll give you a choice. 1 year of probation or your energy center. Glenn's cruel pressure was telling him he had no intention of forgiving him. I'll take the probation. Balder answered, his body curled up. It looked like he couldn't even breathe properly as he was suppressed by Glenn's pressure. Ha! Raon exhaled roughly. He felt exhausted from just watching it. He is really amazing. Most houses didn't punish members of the direct line for their mistakes. They just covered them up slyly. Robert's house was the same, despite being one of the 6 kings. Sieghart was different. Sieghart's head of house punished Balder despite him being his 4th son and the house's executive at the same time, and rather severely at that. Glenn Sieghart was more cold-blooded than he'd thought. Additionally, Glenn turned to look at the entire training ground rather than Balder. There were 2 conditions in today's sword duel. If you are instigated by Balder, the True Martial Palace, or the Flexible Sword Division to harm the Annex building, I'll be punishing you personally. You shall only act if you are confident that you can hide it from me. Yes. The vassals bowed once again and responded loud and clear. There were some unsavory incidents, but the sword duel is now over. Everyone shall leave now. Glenn left the training ground after saying that. Sniff. Tears flowed down from Helen's eyes, one she had been holding back until the end. Wah! Helen grabbed Sylvia's hand and started wailing. She must have been feeling burdened as she was directly involved with the incident, and it seemed her suppressed emotions had exploded once everything was resolved. It's all right. Tears were also welling up in Sylvia's eyes as she patted Helen's back. Ah. Sniff. My lady. Head maid. The other maids also started crying after Helen and Sylvia. Since Glenn had officially announced that the others should not meddle with the annex building as the head of house, their worries had disappeared and their tension was eased. Ha! Raon felt relieved, as he finally had the ability to protect them. That's why I told you that everything would be alright. Raon smiled, pretending he had never been nervous. He continued while looking at them crying and smiling at the same time. Let's return home. The training ground fell silent after the spectators left. 6 people remained in front of the western passage. Sieghart's flame sword emblem was engraved on the left side of their chests, and a different emblem was engraved underneath for each of them. It signified that they were the division leaders that had entrusted their will to Sieghart's emblem. I haven't seen something so amazing in a long time. I thought Rimmer was joking when I heard that he killed the Green War Demon and survived a fight against the Blood-Raving Demon, but the rumor was true. It would be an understatement to call him the real deal. Even though it was a low-grade swordsmanship, he managed to use its true meaning. He can't be described as a mere talent at this point. He will be useful immediately if he joins my division. The division leaders nodded at once, as they had all felt the same thing about Raon. The swordsmanship was amazing, but he had something mixed in with the river footwork. I'm not exactly sure, but his martial arts isn't at an expert's level anymore. What a genius. I knew he was most suited to join my Black Tiger. Fuck off. The 2 female division leaders standing at both sides interrupted him. Oof. Anyway, he certainly grew up better than we expected. The division leader at the center awkwardly cleared his throat and scratched the back of his head. Yes. I thought he was a fragile genius, but he is a healthy monster. He will definitely face the other direct lines if he keeps growing like that. It's very interesting. The division leader with a deep voice licked his lips. Since he is going to graduate soon, the Black Tiger should train him from now on. I like his personality, and I'm confident I can raise him. Oh, shut up. Black Tiger, do you have a death wish? Ugh. 3 out of the 4 others glared at him, and the division leader at the center ducked his head. He isn't completely wrong. It's true that the 5th training ground trainees will soon graduate. They will become swordsmen as soon as they pass the graduation exam, and they will get to choose their squad and division. The division leader with a deep voice snickered while holding onto the handrail. And there is more than Raon in the 5th training ground. Bayan, Runan, and Martha, all 3 of them have might and talent that can become the best no matter where they are. The next selection ceremony is going to be interesting. The division leaders didn't say anything, but they had the same resolution. They had to bring in one of the 4 people during the next selection ceremony. But Raon is still the only one for me. Who wants to kill a Black Tiger today? Me. Count me in. Raon returned to the annex building along with Sylvia, Helen, and the maids. Ah. Helen sighed after looking around the annex building from the front. What's up? Sylvia tilted her head while grabbing her shoulder. I thought we might not be able to return together like this. Helen closed her eyes. She had countless thoughts about what could have happened that day. If ever Raon lost, she was going to beg for mercy, even if it cost her own life. Instead, she had received an apology and everyone managed to return together. It felt like a dream. Same goes for me. Me too. Me too. The maids nodded one after the other. It seemed everyone had the same thing on their minds, and they smiled slightly while looking at each other. You can rest assured now, since Father makes sure to keep his promises. No one will dare hurt us anymore. Sylvia turned to meet the maid's eyes, one by one. After that, she finally looked at Raon and smiled widely. Well, let's have a party today, using every ingredient we have. Yes. Let's make a lot of the stew young master likes. Of course. Sylvia, Helen, and the maids entered the annex building with light, cheerful steps. Ha! Raon slightly sighed while looking at them. His uneasiness had completely disappeared after looking at the way they were smiling and laughing. It seemed they had become a lot more important to him than he'd thought. As Raon was about to enter the annex building, one of the maids slowed to be caught up to by him. It was Judiel. Young master. Judiel turned to Raon. Did you plan all this from the beginning? To a certain extent. Raon nodded. He hurt Radin's pride the moment he attacked Radin, since the sword duel was the only way out of that situation. He won the sword duel as he'd expected and received the apology. However, he didn't expect the true martial palace, the flexible sword division, and Balder to be put on probation. You really are a scary person. Judiel's face turned pale as she sighed. But you are also a kind person. Am I kind? Raon raised his eyes. It was his first time being called that, which embarrassed him more than Radin's attacks. Thank you for saving me back then. Judiel smiled slightly, her ears turning pink. He had seen her smile many times before, but they had always been fake. However, that time was different. He could feel her shyness in her sincere smile. Let's go. Raon warmed his fingers while watching Judiel's back as she walked towards the annex building. It should be fine to reveal the truth now. Ugh. Ugh. Balder Zieghart was breathing roughly. The clean and magnificent true martial palace was completely destroyed, and the walls were shattered to pieces. The true martial palace's swordsman had fainted, scattered around the floor. It wasn't the result of an enemy's attack. Upon returning from the training ground, Balder couldn't hold back his anger and started to destroy the true martial palace. He beat up the swordsmen that were trying to stop him. Ugh. What shall we do? The remaining people didn't know what to do. It was at that moment that a refreshing wind blew in from the destroyed wall. Hello? A long finger swayed from the hole the wind came from, and Rimmer's face poked out. Rimmer! Balder glared at Rimmer with bloodshot eyes. Wow, this is really neat. You should open your window more often. Rimmer grinned and entered the palace over the destroyed wall. Why did you come here? Do you have a death wish? Getting probation from the head of house is the same as a suspended sentence, yet you are trying to cause another issue? Ugh. Balder, who was about to attack him, bit his lip. It was just as Rimmer said, if he caused another problem, he would receive an unbearable punishment. Get out of my sight. I have nothing to say to you. Even if you have nothing to tell me, you should have something to say to this. Rimmer waved the paper he took from his top. That's. Balder's eyes widened upon noticing the fluttering paper. You must know about it, right? It's the proof of the bet between you, the true martial palace master, and the worthless me. Rimmer grinned. The way he was talking, his voice, his behavior, everything about him was hateful. He couldn't understand how such a person was an elf. Since it will be difficult to meet you once you start your probation, give them to me right now. Coo. I don't have them. Balder violently shook his head. I can't give that to him in this situation. He had staked too many things in the bet with Rimmer. Since their activities were paused, giving away those items would greatly slow down the true martial palace's growth. Oh. Why do you have to be like this when you should know better? Rimmer clicked his tongue and flicked his finger. Everyone knows that the true martial palace has acquired a large number of elixirs. Ah, did you already get Alzheimer's because of the shock? Do you really want to die? Balder bared his teeth and growled. Oh, no. Don't do this to me. Rimmer stepped back with an exaggerated expression. Balder wanted to pluck off his stupid swaying ears. Fuck off. I have nothing to give you. Are you sure you will be fine with that? Rimmer grinned and shook his hand. You've disgraced the head of house's name during the sword duel, yet you are not going to keep your promise? I wonder what the head of house is going to think about this. He raised his fingers one by one. The probation and the activity suspension can be extended to 2 years, and he might even confiscate all your property. No way. Balder bit his lips. His father could do it the way he was currently. He wanted to pulverize that hateful bastard, but it was truly a shame that he had no means of achieving that. Give them to me. I still have lots of people to visit after you to collect my rewards. Rimmer smiled, extending both of his hands like a child asking for pocket money. Damn it! Balder's scream resounded throughout the true martial palace once again. Chapter 98. The fifth training ground opened up again after the rest and recovery period. Raon was headed there after a long time. He kept receiving strange glances from everyone he met on the way. They used to look at him like a pebble on the road, yet they were now looking at him as if he was a mysterious creature. There were favorable and hostile gazes mixed in between. That's the way humans are. Wrath crawled up from the bracelet. They look down on the weak and admire the strong. Humans value strength as much as beasts. I agree with you quite often recently. Raon nodded. Just as Wrath said, they were only looking at him because he had proven his strength. Though, not all gazes were favorable. There were also jealousy, hatred, and even vivid murderous intent. How is Devildom? I guess it would be even worse. Are you curious? Then I'll tell you about it. It's a different place than what humans imagine it to be. Though, weaklings get treated worse than livestock. Wrath murmured that there was no place in the world where the weak were favored. You did great this time. You completely destroyed that ugly bastard with your wrath. You even subdued his father. I'm satisfied with your actions for the first time in a long time. Is that so? Yes. Except for one thing. It's a shame that you didn't kill him. Back in Devildom, the King of Essence turned everyone that dared to offend me into a block of ice. Messages appeared as soon as Wrath finished talking. Wrath has been greatly satisfied. Perception has increased by 1. Stamina has increased by 1. It was telling him his stats had increased because Wrath was satisfied. I didn't expect this gift. Raon's lips parted. Receiving a reward he didn't even expect put him in a great mood to start the day with. You cursed system. Why is this the only time you consider the King of Essence your owner? Wrath glared at the system that still wasn't listening to him and boiled in anger. Thank you, I'm growing faster thanks to you. Shut your trap. It makes me angry when you are happy. It hadn't even been 10 seconds since he had said he was satisfied, yet he was already bursting with anger. He was the definition of a personality disorder. Does it? It makes me happy, though. Stop right there, you bastard. Raon hummed and entered the training ground. Wrath kept cursing at him, but he didn't care about him. Raon's eyes widened upon entering the training ground. The person that shouldn't have been there yet was sitting on the platform. Rimmer? It was the lazy elf that was never there during daybreak training, and who was often late to the morning training. Oh. My lucky charm. How are you, my trainee Raon? Rimmer grinned and extended his hands. There were rings with gemstones shining in different colors on his long fingers. He was also wearing shiny bracelets and a necklace on his wrist and neck. What? It was his first time seeing the elf wearing jewelry like that. And they didn't even seem to be artifacts with a special ability, just expensive decorations. Lucky charm? He didn't understand why he was suddenly called a lucky charm. As he was about to conclude that using the sword field creation made him go nuts, Bayan came up from behind him. He gambled. What? That guy, I heard he openly gambled during the sword duel between you and Raon. Apparently, he won a huge amount because your odds were high. Bayan frowned. It looked like just talking about it made him irritated. He murmured that he wanted to pluck out his eyes. He did it again. Raon snickered. He was wondering why he was wearing that jewelry, and it was because he got them by gambling. gambling, drinking, and being lazy. He was the complete opposite of the elves he'd known before. He was pretty amazing in a way. That arrogant, pointy-eared bastard. Wrath ground his teeth while looking at Rimmer. What's up? I get angry each time I see him. Your body would have been mine if only he wasn't there. Aha. Raon nodded. He'd managed to keep his body thanks to Rimmer, who appeared at that critical moment during the fight against the blood-raving demon. Wrath had already called Rimmer arrogant, but it seemed he now hated him. But Raon was aware of Rimmer's true feelings, unlike Wrath. Even though he looked like a useless loafer on the outside, he carefully observed every single trainee and instructed them with appropriate training. Since he managed to survive thanks to that, he could overlook his gambling on him. Pathetic. Martha gave him a cold shoulder and turned away from Rimmer, who was bragging about the rings on his hands. Raon turned his head around at a nasal sound from behind him. Runan was there before he knew it, waving her hand slightly at him with blank eyes. Raon looked around the trainees in the training ground. He remembered them cheering and shouting for him in the training ground. It felt like he was sitting in front of a heater during the cold winter as their voices warmed his heart. It seemed like the people in the 5th training ground were also becoming important to him, on top of those living in the annex building. Okay, is everyone here? Rimmer stopped bragging about his gems like a nouveau riche and clapped his hands. He thought he was just trying to get attention like always, but the instructors behind him brought a metal box forward. Thud. Sand scattered around as the box was put on the ground. Guess what this is? Did you also win this with your gambling? Oh, correct. Rimmer proudly nodded at Bayan's reply. Ha, we've seen enough of them, so stop bragging and let's start training. Ah, this is for you. Rimmer came down from the platform with a wide smile. He walked up to the box and put his hand on it. Sorry? This is ours? That box? What do you mean? The trainees tilted their heads, looking back and forth between Rimmer and the box. The king of gambling had 2 bets. The first was this money. This huge amount of money. Gems. Ha 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 ha. Rimmer called himself the king of gambling and bragged about the rings once again. And the second. He opened the box while giggling, and the clear scent of medicine that soothed the mind spread from it. Raon furrowed his brow and looked at the box. There were dozens of small wooden boxes inside the big box. Are they elixirs? Judging from the luxurious shape and the bitter scent coming from them, they must have been elixirs. They are elixirs. Rimmer immediately satiated the curiosity of the trainees that were tilting their heads. Elixirs? All of them? It looks like there are more than 40 of them. The trainees' jaws dropped, examining the boxes that apparently contained elixirs. Yes, and they even contained the 10-leaf grass. 10-leaf grass. This many of them? Wow. The 10-leaf grass was a medicinal herb that had its leaves split into 10. It was a precious elixir since it could cleanse the body, energy center, and the mana circuit at the same time, all without any bias in terms of attribute. Since an elixir made from the 10-leaf grass had a great balance, it was expensive and difficult to acquire. And yet, there were 40 of them in front of their eyes. It was only natural that they would be surprised. These are for you. Rimmer raised his chin to the sky. He pointed his finger at the box with an accomplished expression. I've prepared exactly 43, so take exactly 1 per person. Eek? Seriously? Are they really ours? Ha? Not just the trainees, even Bayan and Martha's jaws dropped in surprise. Runan was just standing there blankly, sniffing the elixir like a puppy. Why is it so difficult to believe? Rimmer clicked his tongue and threw the elixir box at the top at Raon. Tap. Raon opened the elixir box in confusion. A green bead the size of an adult's thumb was inside. It's a 10-cloud elixir. The amount of mana it contains isn't extraordinary, but it's as pure as raw mana. It's going to help all of you. Rimmer threw the elixirs at the trainees while explaining about the 10-cloud elixir. Where did you acquire this? Bayan furrowed his brow, checking the 10 cloud elixir. One couldn't simply buy a bunch of elixirs because they had a lot of money. He couldn't figure out how he obtained all 43 of them. I won them. Did you really win them all by gambling? It wasn't a gamble but a bet. It's a bet, I say. Rimmer waved his finger to close the lid of the empty box. Who did you even make that bet with? The true Martial Palace Master. He casually replied, like it wasn't a big deal. Ha! True Martial Palace Master is Baldur Zighart. You! The trainees' faces turned pale upon hearing the true Martial Palace Master's name. Some of them even dropped the elixir on the ground in panic. Ah, it's okay. They can't afford to pay attention to us right now. They must be thinking that I will sell them all off, so there won't be any harm to you guys. Rimmer reassured them and told them to take the elixir and cultivate their aura for the rest of the day. Ha! Raon gasped. He had obtained 43 elixirs by straight up making a bet against Baldur, who was the true Martial Palace's master and Glenn's son at the same time. That elf was seriously as eccentric as himself. Thank you. But he had to express his gratitude. Raon bowed at Rimmer while giving him his thanks. Thank you, instructor. Thank you very much. The trainees excitedly followed Raon and showed their gratitude. I see. Rimmer smiled widely and waved his hand. Thank you for the treat. Thank you. Bayan didn't have his usual sour expression as he bowed, and Martha also lowered her head while fiddling with the elixir. Elixirs truly were amazing, to make those peculiar guys react the same way. Well then, you can return. I'm not telling you that because of my hangover, but it's better to take the elixirs right away. Rimmer grabbed his chest and waved his hand. It looked like he was feeling the hangover as he was done with bragging. He looked as deplorable as always, but no one was reproaching him. Rimmer was their hero for the day. Thank you. The trainees thanked him once again before returning. You should stay here. As Raon was about to follow them, Rimmer grabbed his shoulder with a green sheen to his face. You don't look very well. I overdid it a bit yesterday. Now that he looked at it, it wasn't just Rimmer. The other instructors' faces were also green. It seemed he drank a lot with them. Give it back. Rimmer pointed at the elixir box Raon was holding. This one is for you. He took out another elixir box from his chest and opened the lid. The bitter scent was more intense than the 10 cloud elixir. This is... It's made with 2 10-leaf grasses. It would have normally belonged to Raon, but it's a strange turn of fate that you end up getting it. Is it all right for me to have it? I got rich thanks to you, after all. I guess I finally discovered my talent in gambling. Rimmer waved his hands once again and the expensive sound of rings and bracelets colliding with each other could be heard. They will be gone soon. Raon was certain that Rimmer would lose all his fortune from gambling soon enough. 10 cloud elixir is a very efficient elixir. You should be able to absorb at least 50% of the mana it contains. However, the amount of mana it contains is rather small, and it won't make any difference to you. You have auras from 2 different attributes, after all. Rimmer lowered his voice upon mentioning the 2 different attributes, so that no one could hear him. That one has twice as much mana as the other 10 cloud elixirs, so you should be able to grow both your heat and frost. Thank you. Raon bowed. Giving him the elixir was already plenty, yet he was even more thoughtful than that. He just couldn't thank him enough. You should go. See you tomorrow. Rimmer waved his hand. Instructor, please drink in moderation. Oh, are you worried about me? It's 10 years too early to be doing that. He tapped his shoulder and went to the head instructor's room. Raon fiddled with the box containing the 10 cloud elixir while looking at Rimmer's back. Is this what having a teacher feels like? An instructor had raised him in his previous life. His relationship with him was one of an animal keeper and a dog, or a tamer and a wolf. The instructor didn't have any emotions towards him, and Raon only grew enmity towards his instructor. I thought this place was no different. House Sieghart was infamous in the continent, so he thought the trainees would be raised like dogs. However, the children were being raised as human beings, keeping their individuality. Even those that had failed the exam before didn't get abandoned and were being trained in the 6th training ground. Sieghart really was full of humanity, despite his expectations. Rimmer in particular was more like a teacher rather than an instructor. It was thanks to him that he got all those achievements and grew up faster than he would have otherwise. Raon bowed once again towards Rimmer, who was walking away, before leaving the training ground. After taking a nap for 3 hours in the instructor's room, Rimmer visited the Lord's Manor at around noon. It's been a long time. Ren opened the door to the audience chamber with a broad smile. Yes, it's been a while. Rimmer grinned and raised his 10 fingers. Ren smiled slightly to express his disinterest and entered the audience chamber. Rimmer pouted, disappointed in Ren for not recognizing those shiny jewels. He sighed softly and followed him inside. Glenn was the same as always. He was looking down on the world with a bored expression, sitting on the throne he had made himself. Greeting my lord. Rimmer bowed, his 10 fingers and even his wrist raised in the air. You are getting even more pathetic as you get older. Ha! Rimmer frowned at his ridiculous comment and stood up. No, but you should compliment your subordinate if he won some money. It isn't every day that I can empty a doormat's purse. How am I supposed to compliment you when that doormat is my son? He needs to lose to me so he won't get tricked by a real swindler later. What a smooth talker. Glenn raised his chin with a frightening gaze. So, what brought you here today? I distributed the 10 cloud elixirs to the children. I did expect you to do that, but you really did hand them over so easily. It's like, because they grew up better than I thought they would, I wanted to feed them better things. I guess this is how parents feel about their children. Rimmer giggled, and Glenn looked at him curiously. Well, it was basically because my teaching was exceptional, but the trainees became stronger than any other generation after going through various incidents. Glenn nodded slightly in agreement. That's why I have a suggestion. A suggestion? I entrusted you with all the rights concerning training. Because it's not about training. Even though Rimmer's voice used to be playful, it was now boiling with passion. Please allow me to change the content of their graduation exam. Chapter 99. Change the content of the exam? Glenn heaved himself up from the backrest and raised his head. Yes. Rimmer knelt and nodded. Unclouded light radiated from his eyes for the first time since the fight against the blood-raving demon. Is the current graduation exam the instructor's recognition or a match between the trainees? Yes, it is. The trainees had to either pass the examination course the instructor made for them or have one-on-one matches between them to gain the instructor's acknowledgement in order to become a swordsman. Then what do you want it to be instead? Survival. Rimmer replied immediately. I want to send the trainees outside, without allowing them to use the Sieghart name. Send them outside? Glenn seemed interested as he leaned forward slightly. Yes. The 5th training ground's children have passed the trial of pressure, and they've achieved victory in the match of pride against the Owen Kingdom's Knight trainees. Neither of them was any different than a graduation exam. You used various means to achieve that. Indeed. However, some incidents were beyond my expectations. During the second mission, the trainees went through a fight of life and death and managed to pass a great hurdle. Rimmer smiled. It was by pure coincidence that he had arrived there late, but the children had managed to achieve great growth both physically and mentally thanks to that. I want this test to be an opportunity for the children to grow, rather than just a graduation ceremony. Even if it ends up slowing them down on their path to become swordsmen, I want to create a foundation for them to reach a higher level. You are right. How they become swordsmen is more important than when. Glenn closed his eyes in agreement. I'm glad you understand. With the way they are currently, the children need a new trial rather than an existing one. Rimmer raised his long index finger. Surviving on their own without the house's power, the instructor's help, or the great Sieghart name will greatly help their growth. You've changed. The corners of Glenn's mouth raised slightly, seeing Rimmer's confident gaze as he was knelt. Sorry? You did say you would try raising the children, but you didn't look that interested in it before. You also did your preparations half-heartedly. Rimmer quickly avoided his eyes as his faults were found out. You started changing with the children after you met them. I don't think you realize how different your current expression is from before you met them. I'm embarrassed. I also agree with him. Ren nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. Sir Rimmer, your expression has become really great. I realized sword wasn't my only talent, as I was also really great at raising children. Rimmer scratched the side of his head, trying to hide his embarrassed expression. I'm soon going to make the next king after my lord with my own end. Which means I'll be the kingmaker. And is that going to be Raon? We don't know about that. It could be Bayan, or Martha, or Runan could rise to that position. I see. Glenn smiled visibly, which was a rare sight to behold. He was pleased with Rimmer's newfound joy since he used to be the closest person to fight alongside him. Make a report on where you are going to send the children and how that will affect their growth. I'll give you 1 week, so if you can't do it, it will be cancelled. But of course. Rimmer confidently smiled and took out a folder from his chest. I brought it already. Raon climbed the North Grave Mountain instead of going to the annex building or the dormitory with the 10 cloud elixir. He was headed to the location the charcoal kiln used to be, the chilly colder now. I feel comfortable here. Probably because it was the place where he had acquired the 10,000 flames cultivation and the coldness of frost, he felt comfortable cultivating there and he could feel mana more easily. He sat down in front of the charcoal kiln's location, no trace of it remaining. He closed his eyes, listening to the refreshing sound of leaves and grass fluttering in the wind. He spread his aura perception to check his surroundings, and no human nor animal could be found. Vulcan had found a really great location. Ha! Raon rotated the ring of fire to gather the energy from his body before opening his eyes. It was perfect weather and time to start cultivating. Tap. He opened the wooden box he received from Rimmer, a scent clear enough to numb his nose coming from it. 50%, ha. 10 cloud elixir is called a 50% elixir. While around 30% of the energy could usually be absorbed from other elixirs, about 50% of 10 cloud elixir's energy could be absorbed instead. Thanks to its excellent absorption efficiency and the high purity of its energy, 10 cloud elixir was one of the best elixirs for a growing warrior. So what? Its contents are still as tiny as a speck. Wrath snorted, looking at the elixir. Well, the quantity is small indeed. It couldn't be great in every single aspect. 10 cloud elixir contained a small quantity of mana compared to the other elixirs. However, the one Rimmer gave him made up for its drawback by using 2 10-leaf grasses. It had as much energy as an average medium-level elixir, which would allow him to grow significantly after properly absorbing it. Then, Raon took the elixir with his fingers. Feeling a warmth that contrasted with the cold wind blowing on the mountain, he put the 10 cloud elixir in his mouth. The elixir melted in his mouth as soon as it touched his tongue. He could feel a warm and pure energy around his navel, as if the mana of nature itself was inside his stomach. As the 10 cloud elixir's mana started boiling up, he used Ring of Fire to absorb its energy. Whirr! The 10 cloud elixir's energy smoothly dashed through his mana circuit, as expected of an elixir that was unbiased against attributes. The energy soared like a tidal wave and the ice from his mana circuit melted down, expelling the murky energy remaining from his previous combat. It has a high density. The quantity of mana was still small, even with 2 10-leaf grasses. However, the mana it contained was as pure as nature itself and was both warm and smooth at the same time. It was a perfect elixir for his unstable body, where the heat from the 10,000 flames cultivation and the coldness of the frost coexisted in his energy center. Leading the heat and frost, one after another, Raon accumulated the 10 cloud elixir's pure energy in his energy center. The quantity of gathered energy was small, like building a sandcastle, but the mana was denser and purer than any other elixir. Just like a lake of sages that was said to be made of dew, he felt the exhilaration of clear energy without a single speck of impurity running through his mana circuit as he became even more focused on the cultivation. Raon opened his eyes, hearing the thin chirping sound of birds announcing that it was night in the North Grave Mountain. Sparkle! His eyes shone like the kiln's flame. I got it all. Getting 40% of the energy from an elixir was usually called a jackpot. However, Raon had just managed to accumulate 60% of the 10 cloud elixir's energy in his energy center. It wasn't an exaggeration to say it was a miracle. Huff. Raon closed his eyes to check the state of the ring of fire and the coldness of the frost. When he opened his eyes again, messages appeared one after the other. A new ring of fire has been cultivated. Ring of fire has reached 5 stars. Body level has increased. You can now move more efficiently. Strength has increased greatly. Agility has increased greatly. Stamina has increased greatly. The pleasant trembling of increased physical abilities could be felt from the edge of his hand to his shoulder. Soul level has increased. Willpower has increased greatly. Perception has increased greatly. Energy has increased greatly. A second set of messages appeared before he could fully enjoy his happiness. A clear aura flowed through his widened energy center and mana circuit. It felt at least 1.5 times bigger than before thanks to the new ring that had formed. Ha! Raon exhaled excitedly and stood up. He clenched his fist and gathered the aura from the 10,000 flames cultivation. Amazing! His body and aura were reacting a lot faster than before. He still probably couldn't defeat the blood-raving demon in his new state, but at least he wasn't going to lose one-sidedly like before. What's this? Wrath popped out from the bracelet despite having been silent while Raon was cultivating because he was afraid he would get his power stolen once again. Why did your soul level increase again? What technique do you even have? What on earth is the Ring of Fire? I wonder. What kind of life did you have before the King of Essence arrived? Wrath shook his head. How could this happen? Soul level only increased upon defeating a powerful opponent, overcoming a crisis, or achieving certain deeds. It was possible to increase it through training. However, it required many years, enough that can't be simply described as time anymore. Even in Devildom, it had never been the case that a small child like him could increase his soul level through cultivation. Do you think I'll tell you? Raon shook his hand, like he was chasing away a fly. Grit. Wrath bit his molar. It's going to be even more difficult to devour him. Raon had been defending against his wrath and possession through his strong willpower, some unknown cultivation technique, and water resistance. If his soul level increased, it would be as difficult to suppress him as before he accepted his wrath. Curb your arrogance. No matter how much effort you make, no matter what you obtain, your body and soul will belong to the King of Essence in the end. Stop crying and just talk. I'm not crying. The King of Essence is Devildom's. Okay, you are the Monarch of Wrath. I get it. Kiyu. Raon sneered and shook the dust off his clothes. As he was about to return to the annex building after tidying his outfit, he noticed the box on the ground. He picked up the elixir box from the ground and flipped his hair back. Seriously. While someone was struggling to consume him, someone else was itching to help him. It was obvious who he should take after among the two and how he should act. Raon ignored Wrath, who was gritting his teeth, and climbed down the North Grave Mountain. The next day, Bian went to the training ground with his heart filled with joy. He managed to absorb more than half of the 10 cloud elixir's energy the day before because his cultivation went really well. He felt like he had become a different person in a single day, his energy center completely full. As I am right now. He probably still couldn't win against Raon, but he might be able to put up a good fight. The thought of it was making him smile. Humph. Bian straightened his spine and waited for Raon's arrival. He wanted to see his astonished eyes. Creak. He turned upon hearing the sound of the training ground's door opening. Martha was there instead of Raon, who he had been waiting for. She also managed to absorb a lot. The energy he could feel from her was as sturdy as a boulder, but sharp at the same time. It seemed she had also managed to absorb a significant amount of energy. Why are you staring at me? You are making my morning unpleasant. Bian turned his head since he didn't want to slam his pleasant mood into the mud. She has a bad personality, but her abilities are a real deal. The energy he could feel from Martha was different from the day before. It was less than his own, but she had also absorbed quite a lot of energy. Creak. The sound of the door opening could be heard once again. There were 2 sets of footsteps, but it felt like only one person was walking in. He was sure that it was Raon and Runan. Let's see. Bayan turned, his smile full of confidence. And then his expression shattered like a glass. What is that guy? The energy surrounding Raon was as natural as flowing water. Bayan swallowed. Such slickness was only possible among the experts. The amount of aura and its balance with his body. Everything was different from the day before. If Bayan's change could be digitized as a 5, then Raon's change would have been a 10. What a monster! Bayan grit his teeth. He wanted to make him admire his change, but he was astonished instead. It was so absurd that he became speechless. Ugh! He frowned and glared at Raon, but he just tilted his head, silently asking why he was looking at him. He had already acknowledged his efforts and talent, but his carefree face still made him angry. However, I'm never going to give up. No matter how fast Raon progressed, no matter how strong he became, he had no intention of stopping chasing after him. Since a true swordsman of Sieghart, he imagined, would keep running until the end no matter how powerful his opponent was. Attention! Rimmer's voice could be heard from the front. He didn't even notice his arrival because he was too focused on Raon. Everyone has changed. Rimmer looked around the trainees from the platform and smiled. He looked satisfied with the trainees' growth. I think we can start it now with no problem. Start? What do you mean by start? Because these daily lives have to come to an end. He pointed his finger at the training ground. What? End? What do you mean? The trainees trembled nervously upon hearing that it was going to end out of nowhere. You have to take the graduation test. I know you love me so much, but you can't remain a trainee forever. Ha? Aha! The graduation exam. The trainees' expressions brightened once again upon hearing it was about the exam. Their eyes turned as bright as a sunflower looking at the sun, looking forward to becoming real swordsmen. It's too early to celebrate. Rimmer clicked his tongue and wagged his finger. He gave a nasty smile, looking at the trainees. After all, the exam you are going to take will be completely different from the graduation exams of the past. Chapter 100. A different exam? Raon tilted his head. Sieghart's trainee graduation exam was a simple one, consisting of either a match between the trainees or passing a course the instructors made for them. Judging from Rimmer's sly expression, the exam seemed to be rather extraordinary. You guys have a lot more experience than the other trainees. Rimmer clicked his tongue and wagged his finger. Matches of honor, battles of life and death, and a fighting method that uses your level. You went through experiences that you would normally face after becoming a regular swordsman. He was right. Although it wasn't as much as Raon in his previous life, the 5th training ground trainees had experienced various things, more than House Robert or the other training grounds. It was pointless to give them an average test since they would easily pass. Exams are an opportunity to accelerate your growth. Since an average test wouldn't help you in any way, I decided to change the content. Certainly. Everyone nodded after hearing Rimmer's explanation. It was a natural reaction since the trainees wanted to become more than just average swordsmen after watching Raon's fights and growing up with him. So, what kind of exam are we going to take? Bayan raised his hand and leaned forward. Survival. Rimmer's expression suddenly changed. He wasn't an old man living in the neighborhood anymore. Heavy and sharp pressure emanated from him. It's survival. You are going to live outside, without using your position as Sieghart trainees. Your name and a single sword are the only thing you will be allowed to carry with you. As survival. Eek. We have to go outside with just our name and a sword? Since the trainees didn't expect survival at all as an exam, their jaws dropped at once. I understand your confusion, since it must be completely different from what you expected from a graduation exam. However, I'm sure this trial is necessary for you. Rimmer sat on the platform and looked down on the trainees. You are currently overflowing with confidence. You've defeated Owen Kingdom's Knight trainees, survived a battle against Eden and took an elixir to grow both your aura and body. There were also smaller matters, like the battle against the 6th training ground. Well, it was mostly thanks to someone, though. He cast a furtive glance at Raon. In your current state, where you are brimming with confidence, you should see just how big and wide the world is with your own eyes. While the trainees were too confused to say anything, Raon was the only person to nod. He is right. Just as Rimmer said, a real experience was what the trainees needed the most since they had become stronger both physically and mentally. Experiencing a real battle by themselves, without using the house's name, would lead them to a higher level. However, you are allowed to refuse. Rimmer smiled widely, raising his eyebrows. It won't be easy for you to live outside as you've always been eating and living with what the house provided you with. Moreover, you could really die this time since there won't be any instructors following you this time, not even me. He slowly nodded. That's why I'll prepare a different graduation exam for those who are too scared. If you want to refuse, tell me tomorrow after thinking over it thoroughly. A different exam? I don't need something like that. Unlike the other trainees, who were rolling their eyes as they pondered, Martha tapped her hair and shook her head. Her black eyes were shining as she stepped forward. Survival? I've been doing something like that ever since I started walking. Bring it on. Martha sneered, ready for any kind of exam. I'm also fine with that. Baon's indifferent voice could be heard as he stepped up. His serious eyes held no sign of wavering. Graduation exam with survival as its theme, I agree that it's an opportunity for me to grow. I'm going to accept it. So, we have 2 people already. Rimmer raised 2 fingers with a grin on his face. I'll do it as well. Me too. Please, sign me up. Everyone started raising their hands, telling him they also wanted to join since Baon and Martha said they would. Good. Rimmer clapped his hands and smiled each time the trainees said they would join. Runan. Raon turned around to call Runan, who was standing there blankly. She was tapping her feet at the same time Rimmer clapped his hand to get into the rhythm. It looked like she didn't really care about what was happening. What are you planning to do? What will you do, Raon? I'll do it. Then I'll do it too. She went up and told Rimmer she would participate. As such, all 42 trainees raised their hands, Raon being the only one left. Raon, how about you? Of course. I will go. Is it okay for you to respond without thinking it through, despite being the top trainee? You don't even know where I'm going to send you. Rimmer pouted, a mischievous expression on his face. That's fine. Raon smiled, not yielding to his provocation. I'm sure it will be really difficult, but the instructor never gives us a trial that we can't overcome. You? Rimmer's expression suddenly changed at Raon's confidently declared statement. He looked more embarrassed than happy. Rimmer had analyzed the characteristics, strengths, and weaknesses of every single trainee to teach them accordingly. Raon only found out about it recently, but most of Rimmer's actions were for the sake of the trainees. Despite his shallow behavior and tone, there was no reason to distrust him. His thoughts alone were thorough. I agree with him. Baon nodded, standing next to Raon. You are lazy, bad at arriving on time, and fond of alcohol and gambling, but I can count on you when it comes down to education. Martha turned her head, but didn't say anything special, which meant that she agreed with Baon and Raon to a certain extent. It's really touching that my students think of me like that. Rimmer pretended to cry, making the sniffling sound with his mouth. He was pretending, trying to pass it off as a joke, but it was obvious he was happy about it as his mouth was curving up into a crescent shape. But that's not a reason for me to go easy on you. You'd better be thoroughly prepared. He extended his hand behind him, and an instructor gave him the file. I was planning to tell you in a week, but since everyone agreed, I'll just tell you where you will be going right now. Are we going to the same place? Baon raised his hand and asked. Of course not. Rimmer wagged his finger. You might say that I'm wrong, but you tend to rely on one person too much. His gaze was directed at Raon, and the trainees followed his gaze. That's true. Well, I guess that's right. The trainees licked their lips, agreeing with Rimmer to a certain extent. They were jealous of Raon and hated him at first, but they were now wholeheartedly following him after training, fighting, and overcoming a crisis together. It's a good thing that you have a better relationship now, but it's not good to one-sidedly rely on him. With a soft smile, Rimmer looked at the trainees one after the other. Become swordsmen who can be relied upon by the others through this exam. Yes. Understood. The trainees yelled their heads off, as they could feel the instructor's sincere intentions. Well, then. Rimmer opened the brochure he got from the instructor. Bayan Zighart. Yes. You will go to the Lovine Desert in the west. Understood. Martha Zighart, you will go to the Sayan Canyon in the east, and... Without waiting for the trainee's response, Rimmer recited where they were headed one after another. Runan Sullian, you will go to the Kadam jungle in the northwest. Yes. And finally, Raon Zighart. Raon was the only one left after every trainee had been mentioned. Yes. You will go to the Haben Castle in the northeast. Haben Castle. Raon narrowed his eyes. He is sending me to such a wretched place. Haben Castle was located further north than Zighart, as one of the battlefields that fought against the monsters of the Northern Sea and Stalin Mountain 365 days a year. I'm sure it will be helpful. Even though he had the Ring of Fire and the 10,000 Flames cultivation, he still hadn't entirely regained his perception from his previous life. Living on such a battlefield would probably allow him to regain and surpass the murderous intent and perception he had in his previous life. There's 1 month left until departure. Gather information about where you are headed, think and decide by yourselves what and how you are going to prepare. This is all part of the exam. Rimmer raised his chin, closing the brochure. Yes. Understood. The trainees' eyes contained anticipation for their growth and anxiety for the unknown at the same time as they replied, loud and clear. It's going to be difficult for everyone, but you are going to suffer a lot. Rimmer stepped down in front of Raon, trying to scare him. That place is called the Battle Hell because you don't even have time to unsheath your sword. Eek. Dorian was frightened, legs trembling, as he was supposed to go to Haben Castle with him. Raon snickered at the sight. Hell sounds good to me. Ha? Because I'll become stronger if I manage to survive that hell, and... Raon nodded, with a confident smile. I've already experienced the real hell. Do you really have to do that? Once Raon told the story about the graduation exam in the annex building, Helen trembled and shook her head. Haben Castle is one of Zighart's barriers, where powerful monsters endlessly pour in. He said he would prepare a different exam, so why do you need to go to such a place? This is for... He has to go. Before Raon could talk, Sylvia put down her fork and knife and nodded. But that's a really dangerous place. He still has to go. Sylvia shook her head at Helen and looked at Raon. Because it's an opportunity for Raon to grow. She didn't see Raon as a little child anymore after his match against Radin. A swordsman, that's how she treated him now. But that didn't mean Sylvia's worries had disappeared. The hand holding her glass of water was trembling slightly. Mom is right. Raon closed his eyes while Sylvia, Helen, and the maids looked at him with worried gazes. Just as the instructor said, this is an opportunity to grow, not just an exam. I have to grab this opportunity since it's here. Yes, that's a wise decision. It seemed Helen and the maids still had a lot to say, but Sylvia was different since she used to live as a warrior. She had completely recognized his abilities. It's convenient. Helen had a great voice in the matter as the head maid, but she couldn't beat Sylvia. Since he had Sylvia's agreement, it would be easier to train in the future. I'm going to train, then. Raon put aside his empty dish and stood up. Raon. As he was about to return to his room, Sylvia turned her head. Prepare yourself thoroughly, be ready for any situation. All right. Raon nodded confidently and left the room. My lady, are you really okay? Ha, there's no way I would be. Sylvia's hand that was holding the glass of water visibly trembled. There was no way she would feel at ease when her only son was going to a dangerous place. However, unlike Helen, she was aware of what kind of people warriors were, and what kind of things swordsmen craved. That was why she had to allow Raon to go there, no matter how much she hated it. Even if she objected to it, Raon would go there anyway. It was better for his sake to just straight up allow him. But I'm still worried. It's such a dangerous place. It's normal to be worried. Sylvia nodded her head. That's why there's something we need to do. We need to do something? Yes. We have to maintain our current state to the best of our abilities, so that Raon can rest assured once he returns. She looked around the maids and smiled widely. She was hiding away her anxiety as a mother and the annex building's master. My lady. The maids quietly nodded, agreeing with her. Judiel silently clenched her fist, looking at Sylvia and Helen. Even though he was about to head over to a battlefield in a month, Raon's daily routine remained the same as always. He did his daybreak training like always, then went to the 5th training ground to have Rimmer and the instructors teach him, and he was the last one to leave in the evening to keep training. However, the intensity was on a different level from before. Bayan and Martha got sick of him just from watching him, and Runan was too tired to keep up with him. The training was so difficult that it was eating up his immense willpower. Raon kept doing it every day for a week, before returning to the annex building. Since it was time for everyone to be asleep, he entered his room through the window. It was so tidy that not a single speck of dust could be seen, and a gentle fragrance could be smelled from the clothes and bedding. They didn't need to do all this. Despite his thoughts, he was smiling on the outside. He was grateful to Sylvia and the maids, who worked hard to let him rest comfortably whenever he returned. Raon exhaled and sat at the bed. He felt sleepy since the recent training had been difficult, even for him. As he was about to lie down on the bed, he could feel something on it. What is this? He tilted his head and lifted the corner of the blanket, spotting a small book. This is... Raon's eyes widened upon reading the book. The book contained information about Haben Castle, which was where he was headed. It's geographic information about the monsters that appeared there, and even information about important personnel. It was obvious who left the book there. Judiel. She had prepared that information after learning that he was headed to Haben Castle. Raon licked his lips, feeling bitterness on the tip of his tongue. I need to clear this up before heading out.